If you grew up in the 1980s, 1990s, or 2000s, you had some wonderful car options. The BMW E30 Generation 3 Series, the mid-90s Honda Civic Si, the mid-90s E36 M3, the Honda S2000. You even had weird stuff like the funky clown shoe BMW M Coupe, stalwarts like the Porsche 911, or if you were a family guy, the mighty BMW M5. But if you were a Honda guy, there was only one car at the top of your list, the Acura NSX. If you were from one of those generations, we were the generations that were taught to care. We were the generations that had Live Aid, the generations that had Care Bears, the generations that had the first Earth Day. And if you were a car guy, that presented a problem. In 1999, Honda solved that problem in the same factory where the NSX was built with the first generation Honda Insight. Today, we're gonna tell you why the first generation Honda Insight is one of the best cars ever made.
To do that, we're going to put the legendary efficiency of the Insight to the test in an attempt to reach the fabled Prometheus tree stump in the Snake Range in Nevada. The trailhead is 651 miles away from our location just north of Denver, and we're going to try to do it in one tank of gas. Along the way, we'll uncover the story of the world's oldest tree, a nearly 5,000-year-old bristlecone pine that was cut down in 1964. The trailhead is 6 miles beyond the EPA estimated range of the Insight, which means we'll have to average over 61.5 miles per gallon to make it. We're going to put the Insight to the ultimate test in order to prove this remarkable engineering achievement is just as relevant today as it was in 1999. In 1964, graduate student Donald Curry, on a grant from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, turned his attention to the Great Basin bristlecone pines of Nevada.
It was a kind of a sense of discovery. Wow, here's another mountain range with bristlecone pines. I wonder how old they are. I wonder what they can tell us.
These ancient mysterious trees live in arid high climates and can offer a window into the past. The legend goes that while trying to take core samples, he selected a random tree in a desolate grove only to have his expensive drill bit get stuck.
The normal approach to coring the tree wasn't working.
What followed next was a tragic collision of humankind and nature when the tree was cut down to retrieve the bit.
And you've got to think, I've got to have done something wrong. I better recount. I better recount again. I better look really carefully with higher magnification.
Back at his lab, he began to count the rings and eventually discovered the tree to be the oldest non-colonial organism in the world.
5 minutes of looking is all that was involved.
Prometheus was only one tree, but Curry's misfortune rocked the world when people heard it was cut down. What better way to tell the story of the Insight than to try to locate the lost Prometheus tree stump?
In order to tell the story of the first generation Honda Insight, we have to start with the Acura NSX. The story of the NSX goes back to the early 1980s when chief designer Masahito Nakano used the F-16 Viper as his inspiration to design what would become Honda's first supercar. And the level of design was fanatic. It was the first Honda to have a monocoque aluminum structure, the first Honda to have variable timing in the form of VTEC. In the development of the NSX, Honda relied on Ayrton Senna to tune the chassis. The NSX is one of the few cars you can get behind and you feel Senna, you feel his legacy, you feel the precision with how it's driven. As Americans, we didn't understand the NSX. People will complain that it didn't have a lot of power. The NSX's purpose was to have precision. If the American cars are muscle cars, the NSX is a scalpel. So what if Honda's greatest supercar had a little brother? The natural assumption would be the Honda S2000. What if I were to tell you it had a little brother that was more closely related? And that was the Honda Insight. The parallels are stark. Aluminum monocoque chassis, high-performance engines, aluminum components to reduce unsprung weight, and built at the same factory. So what you have here are the 3 cars that share the most lineage of development and evolution, in my opinion, the peak of Honda's greatness. So how does the Insight achieve this performance? It uses a 3-cylinder motor, technology like roller rocker arm, index spark plugs, stuff that you tune race cars with, aluminum suspension components, aluminum wheels, underneath an aerodynamic body that was formed and channeled to create the lowest drag coefficient of a production vehicle. It also had the highest fuel economy of a production car until the mid-teens. 2 records that took over a decade to be broken. To tell us more about the Insight, I brought in my good friend Keith Pizzio. The Insight to me was just weird. Through you, I learned all the nuance.
Racing and performance and chasing fuel efficiency. It's the way you drive it.
All right, point us through aerodynamics.
It's pointy. There's not a lot of opening here. The lower bumper area, which spills air down in the bottom of the tires. You have wheels that are closed in. You have fenders that are tucked in like a TT car.
To finish it off, they like rated depart spin cars.
They had to. I mean, that was the only way to get it done. The steering was pretty close to the S2000. The airbag is directly ripped off from the S2000. Electric power steering on this is off of an EP3 Civics. If you look at the fuel consumption display, it looks just like the start button on the S2000. So you have a manual, so you can coast all day long.
Surf.
Tailgating, you're tailgating, you're riding behind a semi. Surfing, you're on the side of them. You can still catch that wake. You watch your fuel consumption display just spike.
What's the most you've ever gotten out of a tank?
It was 616 or something like that, which is pretty good. It's a CVT. It's not supposed to get that kind of mileage.
Yeah.
A manual will get that kind of mileage all day long.
Gas tank's a funnel.
This is a Honda thing.
10.6 gallon tank. Top it till the filler neck. Have you done that?
No.
Okay, but
10.8?
10.8, maybe 11?
Maybe 10.8.
The most I've gotten is maybe 600 plus or minus, and that's gonna be a problem. We're going I-70 over 2 mountain passes and then Utah high desert. It might even be like 680.
The trip will be made or broken by Vail. You have to employ every technique you have. You've gotten all the way into the Rockies. If you're not at X, you're not gonna make it to Y.
There really is no more fanatic group of owners than Insight owners.
You know, you're talking 17, 18,000 globally. And so if you have one, you know other people that have one.
You gotta own your nerdism. You gotta just be like, this is me, man. I'm home.
Yeah, of course it's goofy looking. Of course it's slow.
It's kind of like me.
So the Insight is special and it's quirky, but how green is it? Especially against today's modern electric cars. To find out, we went to the Mecca of Green, the Earth Sciences Department of the University of Colorado Boulder, and we talked to Professor Alan Lester.
This is a car that represents a kind of technology that existed, decades ago. That is what we need now and wasn't recognized at the time for something that could help solve the climate issues that we're dealing with today.
My footprint is massive, and I own that. And the Insight allows me to care and also allows me to be a car enthusiast and maybe offset my more prodigious producers of noxious gases vehicles that I drive.
Yeah, you can't live in a cave because you're concerned about CO2 emissions. That little tiny effort ain't gonna change the world. It's a mentality. Where you find the middle ground is to each his own.
I've been resistant to electrification. The hate we get on the Insight for having one less Tesla sticker on it is real. But is the argument that these older cars that have been around a lot longer, the carbon footprint on that compared to a modern car with all the consumptive items in it, is that a valid argument?
It's almost like these things are disposable. Wow, isn't this great? We're gonna save the world. We're gonna get electric cars going. And all of a sudden you are extracting all kinds of non-renewable resources from the earth. And even the electricity itself, in many cases, is generated by coal-fired power plants, et cetera, that are emitting CO2. It's not just about the Insight better or worse than a modern electric car, but it's about, hey, there are other ways to skin this cat. As a geologist, if you experience the world, you end up caring about it. If there's anything that's cool about this project, to me, it's like you're gonna go do something that involves being in the world and ending up at a place where something was lost. Is only one tree, but it's representative of life that is being affected by what we do.
All right, up to this point, we've shown you where the insight came from. Now we're gonna show you where it can go to. That tree stump is exactly 651 miles from our current location, and I'm gonna try to get there in 1 tank of gas.
What? Okay, hold on. You're gonna go 1 tank of gas in that? You're missing all kinds of factors. That's like best case scenario, it gets 61 on the highway. You're gonna have to stop for food, you're stopping to camp, you're going over the mountain pass. Best I ever got in that car was like 58.
61 miles per gallon.
What are you gonna do if you run out of gas?
Funny you should ask, because like any good pilot, I've got a plan B. I'm gonna ride this if I run out of gas.
So hold on, what if you run out of gas like 50 miles before you get to the tree?
I'm gonna ride at 50 miles.
Oh, well, in that case, I hope he runs out of gas.
So that actually presents a question. Does the cost of carrying that offset the mileage that it's gonna cost me? And it probably does, because the internet says that weighs 90 pounds. I'm guessing it's probably closer to 60, but I think it would be better to have an out versus be stuck on the side of the road at sunset 20 miles from the tree stump. So in addition, I'm gonna make the challenge real, and I'm gonna bring all this stuff so that I can live, camp, sleep, hike out of the Insight. Only things we're gonna do to prep the Insight is we're gonna seal this lower grill. I'm gonna leave this open. We're gonna try to put every drop of gas we can in here, including filling it up past the filler neck. And then we're gonna put an X on it, just so you know we weren't cheating. Then we're gonna overinflate the tires. The max is 44 PSI. We're gonna push it to 60. Hopefully that doesn't rupture my spleen. Ah, God. The Motocompo is probably the closest thing I'll ever have to a child. I love this thing. And the beauty of it is, it was designed to lay flat. Even with the Motocompo, the Insight had plenty of room thanks to the smuggler's bin. With the Insight brimmed and packed, we began our quest. All right, here we go. I've reset both trip odometers to 0. I've turned the air conditioning off, and I'm gonna have to roll with the windows up, which is gonna be brutal. So now it's all about the technique. There's a gamble I need to make. Do I sit in 3:30 p.m. rush hour traffic on I-25 or take Highway 93, which is slightly longer? This decision alone could be the difference between making it or not making it. Like 1,000 to 1,500 RPM. That's its sweet spot. I think overall that's the strategy I'm gonna try to deploy. My MPGs right now is only 34.5. I need to get that up. It is absolutely gasoline-y in here, and I can't tell if it's from overfilling the filler neck or if it's leaking out of the Motocompo. Getting out of Denver was brutal. With our fuel economy reading alarmingly lower than our target, we were going to need a miracle. Just when we thought there was no hope, we had a fortuitous coincidence. I'm 27 miles in, I'm at 57.1 miles per gallon. But directly in front of me is my hangar neighbor who's going the same place we're going. And he climbs hills at like 30 miles an hour, is incredibly serendipitous. This is nuts, right?
Yeah.
Nate's going camping in Moab,
No, I'm not
in
flying.
the Sun Raider.
Yeah.
We're hangar neighbors, flying buddies, car buddies. I'm at 57 miles per gallon, 27 miles in. I need to average about 61 miles per gallon to make it. So I'm like right there.
What's the magic speed?
55 to 65 is probably my Goldilocks zone.
So loaf for bread on wheels.
Yeah, we had a conversation last night at like 10 o'clock at night where I was like, dude, we're filming this. And then we're like, cool, we'll see each other. And then I was kind of stopped waiting and you drove by. And then we'll camp at the airstrip tonight.
That'd be fun. Okay, I'm so down.
I'm drafted right now. I'm probably like
10 feet off his bumper, and going uphill, I'm showing about 65 mpg. Good God, we might just make it. That's crazy. Nate got us up Clear Creek Canyon, but we got split up in traffic on I-70. As we climbed the mountain, our fuel economy only got worse. The funnel shape of the gas tank causes the gauge to read optimistically high for the first half of the tank. Drafting was becoming more important than ever. I'm on I-70. The next biggest hill coming up is the hill after Georgetown. If I go much slower than 55, I'm a safety hazard and I'm endangering traffic at large and myself. If I go much faster than that, I'm grenading my fuel economy. So here we are at the tunnel. I'm drafting my angry Eastern European trucker friend. This is gonna be the moment of truth. Coming down the backside of this, 52.1 miles per gallon. It's 74 miles in. Can I make up the difference? All right, just coming out of the tunnel. This is it. This is my chance. This is redemption. I've got about 6 miles to charge the battery, recoup my fuel economy, and build up a head of steam before the next uphill, which is gonna be the long slog up Vail Pass. Really not climbing as fast as I need it to be. As the sun set, our numbers were low, showing us falling more than 100 miles short of the trailhead. It's a little gassy in there. And then I started smelling a burning smell, and I'm a little concerned the Motocompo might be leaking a little fuel, but also that anything I put in the smuggler's bin might be getting a little toasty. Yeah, no, it's nice and cool in here. I guess I don't suppose they would offer this space for storage if it was indeed fire hazard. You just drain the gas out of it. But then begs the question, like, if I had this and I ran out of gas, why not just take the gas out of the Motocompo and put it into the Insight? But I don't think that just doesn't feel right to me. I think we gotta ride the Motocompo if we run out. And quite frankly, just not that optimistic we're gonna make it right now. All right, I'm gonna Google Translate this decal. Precautions, please. When removing the cap, turn it already about sufficient turns, triangle symbol, and this on cap, please tighten until it fits. The first factor was vigorous cornering in the Insight to not break and recover our fuel economy. We sloshed a bunch of fuel around, which was pressurized at 5,000 feet, and we're up here crossing the pass at over 10,000 feet. And then I don't think these two triangles had matched. There's one click. Oh yes. Now the triangles match. They make an hourglass, and it shouldn't leak. You're fantastic. I love this little guy. It looks like I got a good seal. Yeah. So it wasn't the Motocompo's fault, it was me. I was the problem. That's how it always is. Going up Vail Pass here, I'm at 95 miles in. This is so stressful. I literally thrive in chaos and stress. I don't know why I'm letting this get to me. I would like to think I'm good at this. I am not good at this. All right, we're at the top of Vail Pass. Wow, that's crazy. We reached the 100-mile mark right at the top of Vail Pass. I'm down to 2 bars of battery, 56.4 miles per gallon. This is it. I need to see 61 mpgs. I'm high as a kite on gasoline fumes, but not as bad as I was earlier. It's funny, my dad, he always smelled like gasoline, and it was always from like working on some cars, chainsaws, lawnmowers. So in a way, just marinating in this just hot box of gasoline in here just reminds me of my dad. I miss you, Dad. I bet he is laughing his ass off at the absurdity of this challenge right now. 58.9, I think that's the highest I've seen yet. Come on, baby. 61.8, we're there. We're back in the game. So now I have achieved the gas mileage
the average fuel economy that I need to make per my calculations to make it. The variables outside of my control are going to be weather, traffic, construction, and we're going to detour. We're going to add some mileage to go to the camp spot tonight. And then the very end of this challenge is a climb up what is one of the steepest mountains in Nevada. And the fuel gauge hasn't moved yet, 203 miles, and it's still at full bars. Interesting.
Stopping for food, we caught back up with Nate, then ventured into the darkness towards the western slope.
We are just past Grand Junction. We got about 25 miles to go to Mac. Fuel dropped to 2 bars from the top. Probably what contributed to the first bar taking so long to disappear was the fuel that we put in the filler tank. It's been a roller coaster of a day just doing these first 260 miles. Hope tomorrow is a lot less stressful.
The next morning, we took a moment to enjoy the sun and blow off some stress from the night before. We also used the opportunity to make sure the Motocompo was 100% in case we needed it to finish the challenge.
All right, busy morning. Here we are back on I-70. Up until this point, I've been following the Colorado River, which has been a net altitude loss. Now I've spent the last couple hundred miles increasing my average fuel economy, but now I'm gonna burn it back down. I'm just gonna have to see how it goes. Fortunately, his hill climbing speed is about 35 to 40. That's gonna help us a ton. So I'm cruising with my hazards on, doing a little bit of drafting. This is amazing. 69 miles an hour uphill behind Nate, and the fuel economy just went back up to 75.9. Wow. So we just pulled off the highway at the first Cisco Junction exit. We're gonna take the frontage road, and at that point, we're gonna say goodbye to Nate. And I'm at 76.3 miles per gallon. That's a high for the trip. I can't get too excited because it's gonna be a climb up through the San Rafael Swell. There's 2 mountain passes, and there's the big mountain pass at the end. So I'll bank everything I can right now because I'm gonna give it back later. Even though we're climbing out of Rabbit Valley, like it just kept ticking up. And then here, it even ticked up 1 more notch. So
it worked. The
yeah,
drafting method
it
actually worked.
100%. Like it could, your speed is perfect,
Yeah.
and your profile is perfect. Yep.
Yeah, I'm so stoked.
Dude.
You're gonna get it. You're gonna make it. I have faith.
At Cisco Junction, we parted ways and climbed into the San Rafael Swell of the central Utah desert, where conditions became unbearable.
Here I'm climbing up the swell wall, and I'm in full assist. Seems like about 35 to 40 is the ideal speed to be going, but my fuel economy is down at like 30 miles per gallon right now, and I'm leaning on the battery knowing that I'll be able to charge it on the other side. But the laws of averages, they are not playing well in my favor right now. And this is just the first of 3 or 4 more passes like this we have to go over. We're here in Salina, Utah. We've gone about 482 miles. The sun's going down right now. We still have about just under 200 miles to go, and there's no places to stay there. We could stay here, but that doesn't really get us as far as we need to go today, and there's not a whole lot of options in between. I don't know where we're gonna end up yet. We're gonna problem solve that now.
Checking the oil, we headed out into the darkness, hoping for a campground that wouldn't grenade our hard-earned fuel economy.
We just came down the pass and now picked up Interstate 15. And of course, the first thing we had on Interstate 15 is a ridiculous mountain pass. Fuel economy's dropped off. We're almost at the top,
And I just hope I have enough room on the other side to earn it all back.
What are you thinking in terms of campsite?
So it's saying 120 miles to the park. To the campsite that we found is 21 miles from here. I do know, like, I've done this before. I've been down this road where things are just going swimmingly, and then the bottom half of the fuel gauge is like, woo, and you're like, ah, like you can watch it fall. We're about 1 mile from the campsite, Oak Creek, Utah. I'm not burning the battery down because I don't want to park it with the battery at a very low charge state. I don't think we've paid a huge price so far, but we've definitely paid a price. I hope we can find a campsite. We woke at sunrise, packed up camp, and headed west to Delta to find some breakfast before starting the final leg of our journey. West of Delta, civilization gave way to arrow straight roads and the salt flats of Sevier Lake as we entered the Great Basin. All right, counting down. There's 600 miles, 77.7 miles per gallon. I've got 88 miles to go. I think we're gonna make it. Recharging the batteries coming down the pass, and with arrow straight road in front of me, I got my first view of Wheeler Peak. I know you're out there, Prometheus tree stump. We're gonna come and pay our tribute to you. As we approached Wheeler Peak, I couldn't help but imagine Donald Curry's excitement some 60 years earlier. Him driving across the desert, drill bit in the trunk, totally unaware of how pivotal this trip would be on the rest of his life. It took me 500 miles to get from full to half. Now, it only took me about 150 miles to get from half to 1/4. So this gas tank is definitely a funnel. All right, we're in the park. I'm trying to stay out of the assist, which has burnt my fuel economy down to 73.7 miles per gallon, which is very remarkable and a testament to the insight.
We made it. 694.7 miles, 73.5 average miles per gallon, and we still have 1/3 of a tank left. And we did something that only a small car like the Insight can do. We found a parking spot in a national park on a Saturday. So now the next part of our mission, we've got about 4 hours of daylight left. We need to hike about a mile down there to the trailhead, and then we're gonna try to find the Prometheus tree stump. We've got 2 possible locations, and we also have a picture of it so we can positively ID it.
The actual location of Prometheus is not readily disclosed. Our research narrowed the location down to 2 sets of coordinates, both in opposite directions.
Wow, how amazing is that? That's Wheeler Peak. There's this secondary ridge, and theoretically, that's where the fabled bristlecone grove that Donald Curry found is. Imagine it being 1964, seeing the Snake Mountains for the first time. That was truly like a golden era. This is kind of the first bristlecone we've encountered, and just look at the texture and like the way it's almost violently sculpted through time. How can you see that and not think it's something special? Look at them there in the sun. I mean, you like see time and space in rocks out in the desert, seeing it in a living organism who's also contributing to our own habitability on this planet's amazing. I think I read somewhere that sometimes the tree will allow part of itself to die so that the rest can live. And that's why you see parts that don't have any bristlecones and other parts that do. I spent so much time flying and traveling through all the different mountain ranges in the West, looking down from the airliner. It's all rocks, but each mountain has its own character. The topography of this mountain isn't necessarily as pretty as some other mountains on the face of it, but then you just like digest it visually and you see the nuance, and it's amazing what a special place this is. You know, he was just carrying that heavy ass drill bit up here, looked at how much farther he had to go, and he was like, you know, I'm good. I'm I'll just pick this one.
Started with what we thought would be the more plausible location. Then, in an act of stubborn defiance, we put ourselves in great peril while ignoring the obvious, a clearly visible bristlecone pine grove at the other location.
I can't get a good fix on my GPS location, but I just think that, like, based on the description, he's not just hiking off the trail to get here. I'm up on this cliff, tagged pretty much every location that it's given us, but just using some deductive reasoning, there's no old bristlecones here. They're all relatively young. Whereas on that ridge, there's a bunch of old bristlecones. That supports the hypothesis that that one is more likely where we'll find it. Literally racing the shadow up this peak. We started there, crossed that scree field, and by memory, I think it's there.
You said this feels right. We just need to keep going.
Does that feel right? From some of the pictures that I saw too. I'm right. Yeah. I mean, we're literally walking among giants right now, and we're off the trail. Grandma and the kids, God bless them, are down on the normal trail. And when we catch our breaths enough to like stop, man, the silence, it's piercing. These giants have been living up here for millennia in this silence, and we're here ruining that. There's a cost to these stories, and there's a part of me that feels like sharing this story is wrong. Can't we leave these guys alone? I mean, this one here looks like it's been cut down. Oh, dude, this is it. This is it. This is it right here. I think the thing I'm experiencing right now is like, you look at like that, and it's like such a monument of just time and nature and creation and how beautiful things are. I've always thought the key to happiness is like appreciating the things that everyone else takes for granted. And it's just a tree. And the whole like environmental movement has so much toxicity on both sides. And we all have a footprint, right? But I'd like to see that there, that's been here for millennia. And then to see this, I'm responsible for this. Like, my species is responsible for this. Like my human quest, my human curiosity to like understand, you know, and like learn, this like insatiable drive we have in humanity to improve and advance led to this. This is the cost of my existence. And the story I'm finding this is, it's been brewing for such a long time just to see it and pay tribute to it. So insignificant, my stupid little challenge. Get to this on one take of gas. And in this grand scheme of things, this is so much more significant than me and this story and this challenge. On one hand, if I was Don Curry and I saw this tree, I would have thought it was just another bristlecone. Like, it doesn't look like that. There's other ones here that are bigger, wider, taller. Maybe they're older and we just don't know. Telling the story of the Prometheus tree stump, there's a cost to that. And I'm so conflicted. I don't want to attract more humans. But at the same time, our world is so filled with like vitriol and hate and anger, selfishness, and the underlying theme of the insight and all the design that went into it has been like caring. Humanity had an impact on this. It's just a tree stump. It's gonna die anyway. But I still care.
My goal in my short time on this earth is to make the lives of those around me and the world around me a better place. I think there's a little bit of room to be found to care a little more. "800 miles, 74.4 miles per gallon, 1 bar remaining, and I've still got 10 miles to go to get to the gas station." And I'm all by my lonesome out here in the desert. Here it is, coasting in. Exactly 810 miles. Annihilated what we even thought was possible by another 160 miles.